Welcome to the Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past shows are podcasts. Pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And thank you very much, Steve Mann, and I am Michael Lyons.
Mm-hmm. And Margaret.
And I'm furious.
Oh, dear.
I'm not furious.
No.
I'm rarely angry.
Actually, that is quite true.
It's true.
You rarely feel anger, and I'm always amazed by it.
I have no comment. Well, tonight's topic is about anger, and specifically the origin of anger. And we're going to talk a little bit about, all around this subject, and I think it's a very good one, maybe very germane and very appropriate for our times. But the interesting thing is there are people who are kind of angry all the time, and in fact, probably all of us know somebody who's just like a hair trigger, walk on eggshells type of person, whether it's a woman or a man. And, oftentimes we will, go out of our way to not be to not offend these people or to not set them off. You don't want to, you're like, Hortense there, you say the wrong thing and she'll light you on fire, or George is he's like a hair trigger. You mention this one topic and it's like a screaming, ranting, raving. And so you tend to almost defer to them, and I think that that's exactly the wrong thing to do in some ways, because it feeds that ego sense, or that incorrect ego sense, that somehow anger is a powerful position, and that a constant sort of threatening, looming, before the storm, lightning front attitude towards the world will get you what you want. It frightens people. It makes them do what you want them to do, and anger can appear, and maybe on the surface, to have that sort of a power, and that this constantly, you find people who are in this constantly angry or constantly touchy mood. Anything will set them off, so that everybody will, kind of do whatever they can to prevent the explosion, appease the volcano, if you will.
Right.
And I think that just reinforces that incorrect appreciation of anger, and it's not good for either party. I mean, it makes the people who have to deal with this person upset and anxious potentially, or perhaps just, I'll do anything not to be in the same room with, George or Martha or whomever who's going to scream, rant, and rave at the drop of a hat. And it also is not good for the people who espouse this, because anger, if you're in a constantly angry mood, your body is under stress all the time. You're forever having stress hormones and cortisols and elevated blood pressure and everything that goes with it. And plus, everyone around you kind of hates you. Nobody likes to be around an angry person. So,
well, yeah.
Yeah, it's not good for anybody.
Usually when you're in any situation, like when you're driving, you can always tell when someone is roiling or that low simmer.
Driving angry.
Yeah, you can always tell. And usually most of us just don't, do not engage. It's like, yeah, you're angry. And the truth of the matter is, especially if you're driving angry, you don't consider the person that you're aiming the anger at your equal. In other words, not to be really considered, you're just an obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's habit forms that you see ingrained. And driving especially, you realize that you've gotten behind the wheel of a powerful vehicle This is an analogy of your body, but it's got power and speed. And you feel, okay, I'm someone to be dealt with. And the minute you perceive some kind of a slight, the person, the angry person, drops into this, oh, I'll get you back. Mm-hmm. How dare you? Or how dare you ignore me? Or how dare you cut me off? Or whatever it may be, then they react. And they believe that this is an expression of personal power. It's really fascinating. No. They don't even realize what's actually happening to them. Mm. They don't just feel angry. They've become anger. Especially if you are not capable of perceiving that reaction that you're in, that well-worn groove of response that you always go into, and how that person always, or people on the road, they always cut me off over here, and da-da-da-da. Oh, you know what I'll do? I'll get even.
Mm-hmm. and you're absolutely right, by the way, as far as the physiological or the emotional reaction, which becomes anger, starts subconsciously, and we can talk a little bit about consciousness and presence and so on, but really, we're talking really at a basic level. Let me just drop back one more. Some of the training that I had years and years ago, we talked about training in emotions and the emotional, the triggers for emotion. So at a basic level, there are certain emotional responses, energy responses, which are tied to the survival instinct. And anger is one of them, and there are others. We don't want to go into all the 7 emotions. But the basic emotions that you see that are tied to survival also have survival level triggers that are baked in. One of the survival level triggers, which is for the emotion of fear, is the fight or flight. In other words, when some threat emerges, and it can be at a subconscious, even sub-awareness level, really at the base part of the brain, at the let's say the cerebellum type of level. Okay, there is an almost automatic monitoring system in every creature on this earth, not just human beings, but every creature on the earth, that is looking out for threats. It's the thing that makes the back of your neck tingle when something is going wrong. When a predator was watching you from cover,
right.
That instinct, that sense of being watched, is still with us today, and that's at the cerebellar level. It's at the survival level. So, triggering that fight or flight is extremely important when you want to preserve your physical existence. Anger is another one of those things. When you're attacked, and this is the fight part of fight or flight, if you're not going to run, you got to get ready to fight back. And that anger, that power that rises in you, that raises your blood pressure, opens your eyes up, sets your muscles ready, tense and ready to strike or to wield a weapon, that concentrates and focuses your awareness to what is attacking you, to the exclusion of all else. They call it red zone. In animals, if a dog or some sort of animal goes into red zone, it's no longer concerned with anything else except the attack, the fight. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this is the survival instinct emotion that we call anger. However, in the survival fight or flight situation, anger is appropriate, or rather, fighting for survival is appropriate. But what has become in human beings in the modern era is those same level of emotional power are getting triggered at non-survival levels, things that aren't really threats, but have become, through our mental facility, attached to, kind of bolted on to these survival level instincts, so that now a trigger which has no actual threat is treated as an existential fight or flight, I'm going to destroy you threat. So you get cut off in traffic, and all of a sudden you want to kill somebody. Well, that's bad, but that's especially if one is living as a sort of an unconscious being and driven and identifying with ego. Ego seizes upon these base triggers, survival level triggers of, let's say, fear or anger, and uses that power for its own purposes to give life to these ego entities. Totally calls them pain body, but there's lots of other ways to think about them. They become vehicles for identity. They become self-reinforcing, and they do what Margaret was just saying, is that you now say, I am, the verb of being. I am angry. I am anger. And I will smite and be powerful and use anything I do, and my whole focus becomes destruction of that which has offended the royal we.
Yes.
Well, that's toxic.
Yes.
But the interesting thing is, we're going to talk a bit about where that all comes from, and identifying it is very important.
Just the understanding the difference between I am angry and I feel angry. Because when you become anger, it basically means that you've given control over. You are not the consciousness that decides what your next step is. You've given the control over to the feeling of anger, and based on that, you make your decisions. And that's key, to understand that you don't need to do that. Most people believe that you have to give over to the anger so that you can get out of the situation that has produced the anger. And that is incorrect. It's the belief that the more powerful is going to survive. You're right in the third chakra, where it's power over someone or power under someone. And everybody fights to be on top. They don't want to be under anyone. So they automatically believe that the more powerful will be on top. And then they just say, okay, well, then if I can get more power by being angry, I'm going to be angry. Instead of, well, I feel anger, but what's really going on? Because we rarely analyze clearly when you're looking through eyes of anger. You miss a lot of stuff.
And I want to go back to your earlier point, because that's exactly right. You miss everything when you become anger. Everyone remembers. This is an analogy to popular culture, but everyone remembers, the dark side of the forest. Well, remember what the whole potency of that was through anger. Your anger is making you powerful. That's one of the quotes from that movie, and it was. Lucas used a lot of archetypes and a lot of mythos, and you'll see throughout the archetypes and mythos that when one loses oneself, when one identifies with anger, you move, into the dark side. You move into that which is no longer human, or doesn't treat anything around it as having a right to exist. Anger treats all others as inferior, as those to be destroyed, as those to be crushed or controlled.
Right. You do not see the other. And I think that makes it an interesting viewpoint, because you can look at it as dark anger.
Exactly, yes.
You cannot see the validity of anything else. It's just that they become blacked out, and all you know is your anger.
Mm.
But it kind of brings into focus, well, if that's dark anger, what is bright anger? What would be the opposite of that?
Light anger?
Light anger?
It's maybe taking this subject a little bit in a different direction, but there is, I was thinking of this earlier too, maybe you were as well. There is such a thing as a righteous anger. We call it righteous anger, but I would say that it's maybe more properly falling on the righteous part of that versus the anger part of it, because a righteous anger is an anger which is under a certain amount of control. It's taking what is a powerful force and giving it a direction through a will, through choice, through an aware choice. So if you can talk about anger controlling you and therefore being sort of the blinded, and dark is another sort of analogy for blind. Blind anger is something we talk about. When you're in a red zone rage.
Yeah, rage is blind anger.
Right. We call it acting in blind anger. You hit out at everything. You destroy everything. You are now no longer treating anything around you as anything other than objects to be destroyed or to be combated. A righteous anger, if we talk about a light or a righteous anger, is an awareness of both an offense and a choice to right that offense. And sometimes to right an offense, you must combat it. But it is a choice of will to say, I will take action against that which I have identified as evil. Knowing, and this is a sort of a key component of righteous anger, knowing that in doing so, the other is not to be destroyed unless it's absolutely the only way to stop it. You take every measure in awareness to combat something without losing yourself in the anger. It is an aware anger. So the word is bad because it's too big of a concept to stick in one word. So you have this idea of a blind, raging anger, and you have this idea of a righteous, sort of just anger, a just way of expressing, of fighting a particular evil.
Clear, maybe.
Maybe clear, but
instead of blind, it's a clear anger.
An anger with some vision, with some clarity to it.
And that can only happen when your consciousness is in control and not the anger.
Exactly.
Fascinating, really, when you think of it. That's the shift upward. If you understand that the anger that rises in you is power that can be used appropriately, and that appropriateness is your consciousness discerning where to take this energy, how to apply it, when to apply it. It's a lot of self-discipline that's necessary in order to do that.
So if we were to draw a fine line, when anger is triggered and anger rises, if it blindly feeds ego and assumes identity and then acts in telling you that this is the way that you are powerful, and to use the movie analogy, you're being drawn into the dark side. Mm-hmm. But it's not incorrect. Lucas really, when he wrote this story, he really understood that there is a duality in this incarnation, in this incarnate existence, and one of the bright lines of duality, one of the very distinct places you can see the duality is in how someone handles anger. Mm-hmm. When fear is one thing. When fear overcomes you, you're destroyed in a sort of a personal way. But when anger overcomes you, you destroy externally. You destroy that which is around you. Yes, you're also in some ways destroying yourself, but the uncontrolled expression of anger causes pain and fear and suffering in others more than it does necessarily immediately in you. So a bright line of conscious awareness, a bright line of discernment is when anger rises. How is it handled? Can you handle it? And some of the work that you were doing with the children is, and this is something that Paul Ekman and his team there, his group, and also the Dalai Lama, to mention a few, are looking towards the awareness of an emotional uprushing. And anger is one that they focus on a lot because you aren't aware of it initially. They're triggered. And this giant well of emotion comes up. And if you haven't trained yourself to become aware of it early, that your hands are clenching and that your gaze is narrowing and you're starting to focus in and you're starting to gather up this rage and this I am, before you get to that point, knowing that here comes anger and having the awareness to say, yeah, I feel, as you train the children to, I feel angry. I have to let myself recognize that something is making me feel angry, not making me angry. And the language is so important there, because once they say, the children, once they say, I feel angry, you've put a big, bright, beautiful wall between I and anger.
Mm-hmm.
And that anger, that wall is I feel. So I'm still me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel angry for this particular moment in time. But I'm still in control. If I am angry, I'm lost. I'm in a maelstrom of lightning and thunder and raging and saying anything that comes to mind and hurting people.
And it's really fascinating because when someone is in a rage like that, many times they don't even recall what they said or did.
No, exactly so.
They're not really aware of what's coming out of their mouth or what they're doing. And you sit there and you go, do you realize that you are being taken out of life and you're letting anger possess you?
It's a great point. Possession.
Yeah, it's you're not even aware. I remember one guy who told me that he was having a wonderful time, and he doesn't want to give in to what he knows he should do. He knows he should discipline himself more so he can, like hold a job down and stuff. And he's like, but I'm having so much fun. And my question to him was, do you remember what was going on when you were having quote unquote fun? He looked at me and goes, no, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at him and said, well, if you can't remember having fun, why are you doing that? Aren't you supposed to be enjoying it?
Mm.
And the memories bring a lot of joy to you as well, but you're blanking out, and that's fun? I just looked at him like, do you understand what you're doing to yourself? Because he was pretty much kind of tearing himself apart at that point.
Mm.
But I digress. That is also part of the awareness that we were speaking of. When you are possessed by anger or any emotion, you really don't have any recall of what you were doing.
Mm. Well, I think I'd like to just stress that point is when people are addicted to a particular substance, it can be alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, and you're using that to party or to do whatever, and you don't remember. You're at a point where your addiction has now taken you over, it's possessed you. You can become addicted to emotional outbursts, this ego fix, this anger, and you can become addicted to anger. You can become habituated to anger. You become, in many ways, an unconscious, fulminating little knot of anger, and you no longer remember. Your days are lived in a series of explosions, a series of raging incidents, and in each one of those, there's no longer a person, a being. There's just an ego which is out of control and feasting upon, gorging upon this upwelling energy of anger. And if you see it in children, you'll see a child who's always acting out, always causing trouble, always getting into trouble, always screaming and yelling or being screamed at, and that can be very toxic, and it can turn into neurotic and psychotic and failed types of behavior. But the origin of that is sort of an addiction to this rush. The ego gets high, if you will, on anger, on this feeling of power.
It's a power hit.
It's a power hit, and I think we've gone nearly half the show without bringing in our topic, because we've been having such a great time with this. But let's draw the bright line that we started before. We're not going to talk about righteous anger now. We're going to talk about the darker side of anger and the addiction to anger. And becoming aware that one is in an angry state is a good first step. And we have a quote from one of our favorites, Eckhart Tolle, talking about what his appreciation of the origin of anger is. It's not necessarily always in its survival aspect. Anger is triggered by an attack, but when you translate that into the mental realm of what becomes an existential attack, and it can be darn near anything, but yet with the same reactiveness to it, Tolle has a whole different take on it. You wanna give Tolle's quote an essay here?
Sure.
He calls it the origin of anger.
Okay. Powerlessness is always behind anger. The ego pretends that your power is there in anger, but anger rises out of a sense of powerlessness. Eckhart Tolle.
Now, doesn't that sound totally contradictory?
Yes. Yes.
Because every angry person would deny that. What do you mean?
Well, usually anger rises when you feel a threat. And it could be a threat to an opinion you have. It could be a threat to a decision that you're going to make. But why is that considered a threat?
Exactly.
And it's usually because it feels like the power to engage is being taken away from you. In other words, you can't control it. It's like we go back to the analogy of driving. You can't control the other driver. But you feel the threat when some car has come at you or too close or done something that has put you in physical danger. When you actually become aware of the series of emotions that rise when that happens, the first question is, what the is going on? Then when you realize the threat that has been enacted on you, you want to get out of there. You want that feeling of not being able to control it, not to be there. Powerlessness is on a scale of emotions, it's very low. It's right there with depression. Okay, you can't do anything about it. And in that moment, you have a choice of feeling that powerlessness or that depression, or choosing something else. And you will always choose something that feels as if this will help you get out of a situation. And anger is actually a higher frequency than helplessness or powerlessness. You feel in anger that you can actually do something. And that's where the perception of, well, that's more powerful than doing nothing. And all this is done instantaneously. This is like a background thing. This is maybe something that you grew up with. And you've already gone through this process unconsciously, but that's the underlying motivation for you to take action or certain types of action. So feeling weak, because that's what it is. No one wants to acknowledge that they're weak. Powerlessness. They don't want to acknowledge it. They want to be able to say, I can do something about it. And so they immediately go into, well, let me feel anger then, because it's better than feeling weak. But to understand that feeling weak doesn't mean you are weak. And feeling anger doesn't mean that you are anger. This is where the discernment, the distinction, it's a very intimate kind of relationship with yourself. If you can distinguish between those feelings of, or that being state, the being state and the feeling, I am or I feel.
Well, and Tolle, I think, has nailed it, as he often does, very exactly. Because this is, again, discernment. So if you're a person who is enraged easily, you come at this, habitually. This is your default state. But the key is why? If you sit down to yourself, if you in a sober moment, because when you're enraged, you're basically drunk on anger. In a sober moment, you say, why am I always angry? The problem with trying to examine it is there's this huge wall built by the ego, because behind that wall is powerlessness. And Margaret said depression, but it's even closer. It's almost like despair. I can't do anything. I can't fix it. I can't become this. I can't overcome this.
Right.
So when the ego feels an existential threat, and the ego is incredibly sensitive, if you just expressing an opinion against the ego's heartfelt beliefs, in some reactive egos, is enough to trigger a towering fury, nail-biting rage. Why? Because the ego feels powerless to combat this. So the problem is when you then sit to yourself, why am I always screaming and ranting and raving and hurting the people I love? Because this is, in a sober moment, what rage alcoholics experience. They often feel regret and remorse, oftentimes far too late, for doing these things. Well, I'm so sorry that I hurt you, and this can go off into all kinds of psychoses and terrible amounts of narcissistic behavior. But we don't need to go in that direction. But the point is that even in that sober moment, it's extremely difficult for the rage addicted to realize that the root of the rage, of the taking over of anger, is a deep well of powerlessness that they feel. So the ego has built up a rage wall against the existential things it perceives as existential threats. So to start to understand, to understand that at least at that kind of a level, that the that someone who rages all the time may be extremely broken behind all that rage.
Right.
That the origin of it may be a deep and extremely traumatic incident or incidents in their past. When you see somebody who is raging all the time, within that rage is a broken person, a person who is incredibly wounded. Why are they so touchy? Because it's a raw, ulcerated, pulsing wound that is being covered by this scab of rage. When you attack an animal and it fights back, it's because it feels threatened. When you say something, 2 words to somebody and they scream and rant and rave at you for a half an hour, well, you say, well, God, no sane person would react that way. No, because what you've done is you've touched upon, quite accidentally, and perhaps in most cases, a raw and ulcerated wound. How dare you say that thing to me? Don't you know? You can hear all the screaming, ranting, and raving because the innocent or the idle perception that you've perhaps uttered in their presence hit a raw wound, a raw nerve, and that instantly went from powerlessness, which is what Margaret was just saying, instantly went from powerlessness to they're attacking, they're trying to kill me, I have to respond. And they go from this broken, wounded person that got reminded of the broken wound to in defense almost, a raging, rageaholic, towering, I'm going to kill everything in my sight in an instant, because it's waiting there, that ego pain body is waiting there, just ready to suck up all that power from the trigger of pain and turn it all into a blast cannon of anger directed at whatever's nearby, without much thought, with no thought at all. There's no more being there. There's a broken, wounded pain body, which is just waiting for this huge infusion of emotional energy, anger, to then start raging around.
Yeah. No, that is when the pain body engages. So if you question whether or not the pain body exists, we go back to, do you remember what you said when you were angry? Or what you did when you were in this emotional state? And if the answer is no, I don't, then it's a sign that the pain body had taken over.
They say, "Oh, I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to."
You did that. You triggered me into that.
You made me angry.
Right.
Is the defense?
That is
Why
the
did you
defense.
make me angry?
Right. And it's incorrect. If you engaged in the anger, you decided to be angry instead of just feel the anger and know that I'm not giving over my life to anger, because that's what you're doing, is you're giving your life over completely to this emotion. And basically, again, I'm going back to what I said before, you're feeling that this is a better state to be in than being completely helpless.
Yeah. And this, when psychologists and therapists will come upon a person who's addicted to anger, who has the pain bodies, they'll often try to get to the root of it by unearthing the trauma little by little. Because again, a therapist has to be a very brave person, because what you're basically doing is like a surgeon without anesthesia rooting around in somebody's wound. Well, they may react badly. The unearthing of a trauma and examination of it in some sort of a way which does not have the triggering of anger. If you can separate those two, if you can just put some small wall between the trauma and the anger, and what you really have to do is say, we're going to examine this and talk it out and put it into the light of day without having, without the re-triggering of it in some way, shape, or form. It's, PTSD is a similar sort of thing. In many ways, it's not rage which is engendered, but sort of a paralyzing anxiety or fear or a paralyzing kind of depression. But it's the same thing. Is you bring these things into the light of day slowly, and re-examine them. And we talked a little bit about one of the sessions some of the sessions that Peterson has done, Jordan Peterson, in his practice. When you unearth these traumas that caused much later life problems, we say, well, this happened, yes, but you were a child. You were being watched by, in essence, a child. That trauma itself was just two unsupervised children. And when you examine it with the full light of day and with more of a mature viewpoint, you say, well, yeah, this was not my fault. It wasn't the other's fault. It was, in essence, a situation that neither one of us was prepared to be in, and we were thrust into. And the memory and the ego's inflation and knitting of additional offenses and every other type of thing to put on top of it is based on an initial trauma, which itself, in and of itself, with a mature viewpoint, you can say, well, you have to forgive that. And this is an interesting thing we can bring in here. The origin of that powerlessness and that trauma, when you go back to it and you have this sober examination of it, if you get past the wall of I can't look at this because it's so painful, or I can't look at this because I'm so powerless and weak there, when you look at it and try to heal it, you have to forgive it.
Yes.
The origin of anger is also an unforgiveness. It's a piece of you which you've left in the past, which is wounded and broken, which anytime it's in any way disturbed, sends these lightning bolts of emotional energy, which again they're latched onto and turned into, I'm going to respond with anger. I'm going to fight back.
And forgiveness it's an amazing, I can't necessarily call it an emotion. Would you call forgiveness an emotion?
No. Forgiveness is a being state.
Okay.
It is literally the awareness of that which is, and acceptance of same, and letting the offense and all of the woundedness out of it.
Right. And to allow yourself go there, because you make the decision on whether or not your being state is I am or I feel. And I think that's fascinating. And forgiveness, that is the only way you can forgive, because if you are in that I am anger state, forgiveness doesn't even occur. All you want to do is destroy the thing that has offended you or taken advantage or whatever it is that has upset you. But forgiveness means that in order to even begin to engage in it, you must be in the I am who I am, instead of I am anger. In other words, I feel anger, which means that you are who you are and you are feeling the anger. Being in that state is the first step in being able to forgive, because you will not be able to forgive if you are in your reaction. But being in the state of I observe my anger and realize that this thing is stuck to me. This incident is stuck to me, and it keeps dragging me down into this angry state.
Yeah, I mean, the forgiveness, the basic thing of forgiveness is acceptance of that which is. And people conflate. This is another. I don't want to digress too much, but people conflate forgiving with approving.
Right.
You say, "I'll never ever forgive them because I can't sanction what they did to me or what they did to them or whatever it is." It becomes the unforgivable because I can't approve of this. Forgiveness has within it a component of acceptance, but you don't approve. You
Right.
say, this was wrong, but this did happen. It's not happening now. It happened then. It hurt me terribly deeply, but I am able to still be. And when you have that terrible... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, where you are at is I choose in this moment to be present instead of I'm living in the past and reliving that moment where the transgression happened and all the anger comes up.
Right, and very importantly...
It's a moment-to-moment decision where the awareness is there and it's like, no, today, this moment, I choose. I choose this. I choose to live. I do not choose the lower emotions that are keeping me in this negative state. Because anger is a negative state.
Well, it can be, yes. But very, very importantly, if you were in a state of powerlessness and injured, if you're put into a state where you cannot defend yourself and injured gravely, injured deeply, that event can become a place where you break off a piece of yourself. You break off and encapsulate this wound, much like the body does when it's attacked by a physical object. That physical wound can become a cyst of some festering infection. Psychologically, when you're put into a place of deep powerlessness, I couldn't do anything about it. I was deeply violated. I was deeply wounded. And then you encapsulate that. It leaves a piece of you behind. It leaves a piece of you in your past. But that piece doesn't dissolve without the acceptance of it, without the re-examination of it, without the reintegration of it. If you leave it back there in its sort of encapsulated state, it gathers energy, it gathers a sort of a life of its own. It becomes a focal point when somebody touches upon it for a tremendous emotional uprising of anger and perhaps other emotions, and they feed into, I am this, I am anger. It becomes a focal point for the pain body, and you can see why. It was an event which happened to you which was nearly taking your life, was nearly taking your psyche and breaking it. To the extent that you were injured and broken is to the extent that thing still has some hold upon you if you leave it there, if you leave it unintegrated.
When people always say, I have this situation that just keeps rising up. I have encountered it again. I thought I took care of that, and here it is again right in front of me. It usually is an indicator that you have not retrieved that piece of you that was holding that moment apart, because in that moment it was overwhelming.
Yes.
So that piece of your soul, that energy, encapsulated the incident and put it to the side so that you can recover. But only you are capable of reintegrating that piece of your soul that went out to allow you that span or that breather. And that's why it always comes back. It's a soul reintegration, retrieval. But what that means is you must process the incident. You can't just wrap it up and throw it away. You can't throw your piece of your soul away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible. Your soul always calls back to it its own pieces. But what's coming with it is what it's been holding for you until you were ready. And that kind of resolve, you must make a conscious decision that you are going to be whole. You give permission for that wholeness. And you ask the divine to help you with that, because you can't see everything. All you know is you're in this maelstrom of emotions, and you're feeling it, but you can't distinguish how to detach or heal from the experience. So it's coming back to the hand of grace that's got to pour into you so that you can maintain your ability to see this. Many times just seeing it is so overwhelming that you've got to take steps back again. But this is where, as I said, prayer and engaging with the divine spirit. It's like, I need an intervention. I need divine intervention because I can't see. I just can't see.
And to go back, the reintegration is you cannot divide yourself. You are you. As a survival mechanism, your psyche has the ability to temporarily encapsulate trauma, but you can't. It's still you, and to go back there and reintegrate that, or it will haunt you. In essence, it's still you. It's still there, whether you see it in the light of day, in the light of presence, and look at it clearly, with others' help or with your own, or you try to bury it. It will still come back. This is why you said, things will continue. Like, I thought I took care of that. Well, no, you haven't. Taking care of it means reintegrating it with the power you have now. At the time that you're wounded or injured, can be at a time when you didn't have the ability to, it's like a small child. You can't lift this rock. It's too heavy for you. Well, you grew up. Now you can lift the rock. Now you can go and look back at that trauma. But it's extremely scary because, again, if you've built up a wall between yourself and this thing, where you said, I just can't go there because it's too horrible. It's too much agony to go back and look at this thing where I was so powerless and broken. Mm-hmm. And so you cover it with helpless. Exactly. You cover it with walls of anger. You cover it with walls of, radioactive. Do not go here. Never touch this. And you have to unwrap all that to get back and retrieve it and reintegrate it. It's not an easy thing.
No.
But if you don't. If you leave it back there, that powerlessness, that piece of you which was desperately wounded, will be underneath and empowering this anger and empowering a pain body and an ego, an ego assumption of identity. So
it will continue to feed the pain body.
Right. Tolle talks about this. That one of the ways to get back there is to, again, bring yourself into presence. Realize that everything that is happening right now, the emotions, the pain body, are still all within your consciousness. They are not you. Once you begin to do that, you can go back and re-examine in the light of consciousness the pains or the things the traumas that you went through back at that time when you weren't conscious, when you were an unconscious being or weren't a fully present being. And you see this in many people who have gone back and reintegrated traumas, Joyce Myers or many others who've been more open and talked about terrible things that happened to them in their past. And again, that vehicle of re-examination requires acceptance and it requires forgiveness. And that forgiveness is 99.99% about you. You're the one being healed here. You're not absolving the other of guilt. And this is the big wall that people put. I can't forgive them because it'll be like they got away with it and they're not guilty. No, the evil is still there, but you reject the poison that is, you pull the arrow out of your body, which is poisoning you by unforgiveness, and which is causing you to be sensitive, to be triggered, to not be a conscious being because you've got an arrow in you from another. Drawing that out and breaking it and forgiving it and accepting it gets you out of the cycle of rage.
Well, you become more of yourself. You can't be yourself when pieces of you are missing. You're just a giant piece of Swiss cheese. Holes, just holes in your soul, if you think of it that way. And you don't need that. You don't want that. And you can call those pieces back. But it takes work to become more whole. And you don't do it alone. Maybe that's the best way to explain that. You are never alone when you open your heart up and ask for help, divine help, to allow mercy to be poured into you so that you can begin to stand in your own authority, autonomy. There is a wholeness that comes with that embrace.
And the healing.
Yes, a wholeness and a healing, a shalom. And we have reached the end of our hour.
I'm not angry about it.
I'm so glad. So I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.